Joining us on the line is Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, of course, Senator for the state of Texas and a host of Verdict, available anywhere you get podcasts. Senator Cruz, great to talk to you, sir.
Ben, great to be with you.
So what is the latest in terms of the congressional negotiations around the next tranche of funding for the Paycheck Protection Program?
Well, it appears we finally got a deal, and I'm hopeful that by the end of the day, the Senate will have passed out additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Program. Republicans tried to do this over a week ago. The program gave guaranteed low-income loans to small businesses to keep small businesses alive, to keep their employees on salary, to keep them getting paychecks. And it ran out of cash last week. And sadly, the Democrats have blocked funding for this program for over a week and really just playing partisan politics with it. I think they have finally given in. So hopefully it will be replenished today or tomorrow.
Now, Senator Cruz, how long do you think this can go on in terms of just Congress continuing to fund business without people getting back to work? Obviously, we're seeing across the country a lot of roiling conversation about how people should go back to work, what level of necessity in terms of tests is really required in order for people to get back to work. Where do you stand on how fast people should get back to work, and how should we go about doing that?
We have got to get back to work. And there's a balance here. There are two national crises going on simultaneously. There's the public health crisis of the coronavirus pandemic, and that is serious. And over 170,000 people have died worldwide. But there's also the economic crisis, and that is devastating. And it has cost over 22 million people their jobs. It is destroying small businesses. It is destroying people's livelihoods. And that likewise is going to cost lives. If we continue producing poverty and destroying everything people have worked for, that's going to increase mental illness and depression. It's going to increase suicide rates and substance abuse and alcohol abuse. That's going to cost real lives. So we got to balance them both. Our objective should be to save as many lives as possible, to protect people and protect their lives. That means that we should continue working to slow the spread of the virus, but we need to get people back to work. And that's got to vary geography by geography, region by region. So, for example, Ben, as you know, New York City has been horribly, horribly hit by this. It's breathtaking how bad it is. Nobody would argue New Yorkers should go back to work tomorrow. But there are a lot of places in the country that thankfully have not endured anywhere near those levels. And we ought to allow young, healthy people to get back to work while at the same time protecting the vulnerable, protecting the really elderly, those with serious health conditions, those who have been most vulnerable to this virus. We can protect them and let everyone else get back to work while practicing sound social distancing to slow the spread of the virus.
So, Senator Cruz, we've been watching as this has become a seriously partisan issue. A lot of people suggesting that if people are urging to go back to work, then that is because they don't care enough about human life. What do you make of those criticisms? It seems like an enormous number of bad faith criticisms happening out there.
Well, unfortunately, the media and many partisan Democrats are just consumed by hatred for Donald Trump. So everything is defined with respect to Trump, and Trump bad is the only thing they can convey. Look, we're in the middle of a crisis. Let's come together. There was one media person, I think it's down in Florida, who sent out a tweet going, "Yay! All these Trump supporters are going to go get the virus and die." Like, what the hell's wrong with you people? Let's not be wishing death on anybody. Fine, you want to disagree on politics? Okay, but look, America has made it through massive challenges in the history of our nation. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, 9/11, but we make it through by coming together, and this sort of deranged Trump hatred is not helpful. And the idea that if you're going back to work, you want people to die, well, that's just dumb. We want to protect lives, and we want to protect lives from the disease, but we also want to protect lives from poverty and misery and suffering. And that's what anyone trying to solve this situation would want to do.
So, Senator Cruz, there's been a lot of talk about what China should have to pay in order to redress the fact that this whole thing happened because China decided to lie for weeks about human-to-human transmission, lied to the WHO, allow millions of citizens to leave the Wuhan province and then travel abroad, spreading this thing and seeding it all over planet earth. What do you think is the proper measure that should be taken by the federal government on this? There's been talk by some that we should somehow cancel China's debt. I don't know that that's possible. What do you think are the options on the table?
I think China bears enormous responsibility, enormous culpability for this devastation on multiple fronts. Number one, we know that there were 2 laboratories in Wuhan within miles of where the outbreak began that were controlled by the Chinese Communist government and that were studying bat coronaviruses. The Chinese government refuses to answer the question whether they were studying this exact virus, whether it was an accidental escape that triggered this global pandemic, number one. Number two, we know for a fact that the Chinese government actively suppressed, covered up, and hid evidence of this outbreak. When heroic physician whistleblowers tried to draw attention to it, the Chinese government came down on them. It punished them. It reprimanded them. It silenced them. And weeks went by where any responsible government with an outbreak like this would have gone in with public health professionals, would have quarantined those affected, and there is a real possibility we could have contained this as a regional outbreak. But because China wanted to save face, wanted to hide their dereliction of duty, they allowed this to become a global pandemic. And in a very real sense, the 170,000 plus lives that have been lost to this pandemic are the direct responsibility of the Chinese Communist government. The trillions of dollars of economic devastation are the direct responsibility of the Chinese government. And we need, number one, a thorough accounting. The United States and the entire community of civilized nations should not allow China just to stonewall and obfuscate and refuse to answer questions about whether they mistakenly released this plague on the world. And number two, there need to be real and serious consequences for their cover-up, killing lives and destroying trillions in economic worth.
So, Senator Cruz, the media have spent an inordinate amount of attention focusing their ire, as you mentioned, on President Trump. They have these press conferences every single day in which they basically just yell at Trump for, an hour about how all of these things he should have done in February and March weren't done. It's weird to me when they pull out this timeline, considering that literally no one was encouraging shutting down the entire American economy in February. Like no one, including the most ardent advocates. Nobody was talking about lockdown orders being put in place in February. In fact, Mayor Garcetti here in Los Angeles allowed the LA Marathon to take place on March 8th. Obviously, you had Mayor Bill de Blasio in New York encouraging people to go to Chinatown for Chinese New Year. You had Nancy Pelosi doing the same thing. What do you make of the double standard that's been applied in terms of the political measures that were recommended by various members of the different parties?
Well, it's even worse than that. It's not that no one was recommending a lockdown. There was leadership, which is the president on January 31st shut down air travel to and from China. And when he did it on January 31st, he was blasted. Joe Biden called him hysterical and xenophobic. Nancy Pelosi introduced legislation to undo the China travel ban. I talked to the president 2 days after he did it. He asked me then, did I do the right thing? Because he was getting a lot of criticism. The New York Times ran multiple op-eds blasting him for having shut down air travel to and from China. I told him on February 2nd, Mr. President, you did exactly the right thing. This is dangerous, and you're acting to protect human lives. Now, the president was right, and Pelosi and Biden and the New York Times and the entire mainstream media were wrong, and they were wrong over and over and over again when the president halted travel to and from Europe. Again, the media got all hysterical, saying this is ridiculous. Who would possibly do that? I think it was about a week later where all the European countries halted travel between each other for the same reason. Listen, this thing is serious. This thing is deadly. And in hindsight, everyone can always second guess what was done and say we should have done more. That's true in any crisis. But the absolute hypocrisy of the media that criticized him, I'll give you an example, Ben. The New York Times wrote a story that said, well, the China travel ban was not that severe because 40,000 people traveled to the U.S. after the travel ban. That's true. In the period before, 400,000 had gone back and forth, but the period after, 40,000 went back. So 90% was restricted. What the president did allow was U.S. citizens and U.S. permanent residents to return home and required that they be quarantined. Now, apparently, the press and the Dems, after attacking the president for imposing the travel ban, their complaint is, you know what? It should have been stricter. We called it xenophobic and hysterical when you did it, but now we wish it had been stricter. Listen, the political games need to stop. We need to solve this problem and defeat this pandemic, and we're going to do so.
Yeah, Senator Cruz, final question for you. President Trump getting a lot of flack for the announcement that he's going to shut down immigration. What have you seen in terms of that policy, and why exactly are the same Democrats who have now reversed on Trump's travel ban from China now taking the side they took back in January and saying that an immigration shutdown for the moment is a good idea?
Well, look, we'll see the precise details of the proposal, but you're already seeing some Democrats criticize it, and it's the same reason they opposed the China travel ban. It's the same reason they opposed blocking travel from countries in Europe where the pandemic was raging. When it comes to immigration, number one, in the midst of a pandemic, enforcing borders and slowing down international travel is basic common sense. It's a way to protect America and keep us safer. And over a month ago, I chaired a hearing in the Senate on the coronavirus, and we heard testimony from the CDC, from the Department of Transportation, and Customs and Border Patrol. All three of the expert witnesses there testified to the Senate that the travel ban on China in January 31st, that it saved lives and it reduced the number of cases in the United States. I think the president's announcement on immigration yesterday did exactly the same thing. But secondly, and this is a premise that the Democrats and the media refuse to acknowledge, legal immigration exists for the benefits of the United States of America, for American workers. Listen, I am the son of an immigrant who came here legally to this country. Legal immigration, legal is a great strength of this country. When we've got 30 million Americans out of work, we don't have a need to be bringing in 1 million plus people from outside the country for jobs. When the job market is tight, when we need skilled labor, legal immigration is a great strength. And the Democrats and the media refuse to acknowledge that look, we need to put American workers first. That is a concept that today's Democratic Party, that is the party of coastal elites and the rich, rather than working men and women, they don't acknowledge that the blue-collar workers that are being put out in the street, that are having trouble making rent, that it makes perfect sense to say, hey, let's pause new workers coming into this economy until we can get Americans back in the workplace.
And Senator Cruz, really appreciate your time. Hang in there, sir, and good luck on fighting these battles. Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. God bless.
I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.